And now, without further ado, Peter Christin Asbjornsen.
I must say I am pleased that so many of you would come to hear me, though you don't really know my name. Why are you here? Maybe you would like to hear about the deep sea creatures that I discovered when I was still at the university. I developed a mechanism I could drop deep into the fjords off the coast of Norway. And with this shovel with a lid, I could pull one rope, the lid would close, and I could scrape creatures off the depths of the ocean. I discovered several new species, including a giant starfish that was 9 feet across with 9 arms. I named it for Freya's jewelry, the great star that she wore upon her chest. For it was Freya's star. And even as a young man, I was fascinated with the folklore and the stories of the Norse gods and goddesses. Maybe it is not deep sea creatures you want to hear about. Maybe you would like to hear about forestry management. I was Norway's first forestry management director. I had the great good fortune to go to Germany and study Germany's history of forest management, and I learned much about what not to do. For Germany clear-cut their ancient forest, and the forest became like deserts. The soil was washed away. And so I look for the old growth, and I make sure that at least a few of the ancient trees, they survive. And we do selective cutting. It is also important to understand the forest of the lowlands along the coast have a different speciation than the forest of the Midlands and the steep slopes, which have different forest than the crowns of the mountains. And the forest that encircles the crown before you reach the high altitude where the wind-blown trees are the only ones that will survive. And so if you plant the right species of tree at the right altitude, paying attention to rainfall and soil, then your forest will be more healthy. But as I did transects of the forest of Scandinavia, I camped with the woodcutters, with the peasants and farmers. And every evening, sitting around the fire, I collected stories. It is not forest management you want to hear about? Maybe you'd like to hear about turf management. Do we have any farmers here? Are you grazing cattle or sheep? You grow different grasses to feed them. And by managing the turf, again, I had the great good fortune to go to Germany and study European turf management at the university there, and I learned what not to do. If you rotate the kinds of crops you grow with your turf and the kinds of animals, I understand there's a farmer just north. He thinks he's doing something new, and it is very good. Have you been to Grateful Graze? By doing integrative turf management, by herding cattle and sheep and chickens, and having different animals, then each deposit a different kind of fertilizer. And each take advantage of a different kind of product. And you get more production from that acreage, and the soil is healthier. So the grass is healthier. Again, as I was studying the turf of Norway and throughout Scandinavia, I would camp with the peasant farmers. They warmly welcomed me into their home, and I collected stories. You do not want to hear about turf management. I know why you came. It was for the stories. My hero, when I was a small boy, was Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm. You know the Grimm Brothers. They began to collect the fairy tales of Europe before I was even born. As a child, those stories were read the world over, and translated into many languages. And so, while in the university, I set out to collect all the Scandinavian folklore that I could. I had a good friend, Jørgen Moe, Christensen and Moe. Look for our books. I'm sure they're in your library. Jørgen was a very different kind of character, but a good partner. He was born to a wealthy family. His father or grandfather was a minister, and he followed in the parents' footsteps, and he studied for the ministry. He earned a degree in theology. I obviously trained as a scientist. But by putting our thoughts together, we're able to read more into the stories, below the stories, to understand the depth and the origin. It was about this time, when we began to publish, that Henry Rowe Schoolcraft, a name you may not know. Do you know Schoolcraft? Schoolcraft was the first geologist to find the headwaters of the Mississippi. He married an Anishinaabe or Chippewa woman, and he was the first to collect the indigenous stories of America as a scholar, to deeply appreciate how the culture is influenced by the science, the landscape, how the trees, the prairies, the rivers provide the context for the stories. Can you say cultural biogeography? Think about it. How does your culture reflect the geology, the biology? The best way to see this is through the stories. You see the culture's relationship to their environment, and you see how they honor and live within as a part of the environment. It was about the same time that a man who eventually became my friend, Prince Maximilian. Prince Maximilian was a German prince. He was the 8th son of the king. He knew he would never be king. And so in 1819, he went to the rainforest of South America, and he lived among the Borocudo Indians. And as he was there collecting their stories, he asked a very simple question. Are the Indians of North America like the Indians of South America? Are they a different race of people? Or is it simply because they live in a different environment, with different resources, that is reflected in their stories? Consider this. Are you Christian? Does Jesus not talk about separating the wheat from the chaff? The sheep from the goats? Clearly, the Christian stories come from an agricultural society that grew wheat and tended sheep. And so the metaphors used by the storytellers reflect the habitat, the environment. How is your culture influenced by the place where you choose to live? Do you put on more clothing when it gets cold? Do you wish you could peel off more layers today? The fruits that we harvest in the summer. Have you had a good peach lately? Or watermelon for breakfast? Yes. How these become the elements of the stories you tell. When I was in Germany, I blush at the thought of it. Jakob Grimm had already left this world, but his younger brother Wilhelm was teaching at the University of Berlin, and I got to meet Wilhelm Grimm, my hero. Who would like to meet your heroes? Who are they? If you could dine with them, what questions might you ask? Not only did I get to meet Wilhelm Grimm, but I was starstruck that he had read the books that Moe and I had published. And he sang our praises. He said that I was his hero. He said that Scandinavian folklore has much to contribute to the world of folklore. For in the Grimm Brothers stories, it is often some knight in shining armor who is rescuing some damsel in distress. But in Scandinavian folklore, it's often that damsel who is doing the rescuing. Not only of herself, but of that fool who got himself into trouble in the first place. The women laugh at this point. Yes, did you rescue that fool you're sitting beside? Do you even know my name? I've not said it yet. Well, I did mention. Peter Christin Asbjornsen. You know my stories. The Three Billy Goats Gruff is probably the most famous story that we collected because I was doing turf management. And we all know that on the other side of the fence, the grass is greener, is it not? Once upon a time, where all good stories begin, there were 3 billy goats, and yes, they were gruff. There was a big billy goat, there was a medium-sized billy goat, and there was a wee little billy goat. And because across the stream, over the bridge, on the hillside, and it is true, in the summer, spring moves north. And so the freshest grass you'll find at a higher elevation. These goats, they know where they live. But as the first little goat went across the bridge, clippity-clop, clippity-clop, underneath the bridge there lived... Ah, who is that crisscrossing my bridge? It is I, the little billy goat. I am going to gobble you up. No, please do not eat me, the little billy goat said. Wait, in just a few minutes, my bigger brother, the medium billy goat gruff, he will come. I am barely a morsel. He will fill your belly. And the troll let him cross, clippity-clop, clippity-clop. And just a few moments later, as he promised, the medium-sized billy goat, clippity-clop, clippity. Who is that crossing my bridge? It is I, the medium-sized goat. I am going to gobble you up. No, do not eat me, for in just a moment, my big brother, he will be a feast. Let me cross, and you can surprise him. And the troll let him cross, clippity-clop, clippity-clop. And just as he promised, a few moments later, the big billy goat gruff, clippity-clop, clippity-clop, he came crossing. Who is that crossing my bridge? It is I, the big billy goat gruff. I am now going to gobble you up. And the troll swung from underneath the bridge and he blocked the path. But at this point, the large billy goat had already lowered his horns. He scratched at the bridge. He raced and kaboom! He hit that troll and he was knocked clear to next Sunday. And the 3 billy goats gruff, they grazed that grass on the mountainside until their bellies were full. And I think they might still be there until this day. We all love trolls, do we not? I'm sure you've met a few. There are trolls about, and we must keep our wits about us. High in the mountains, there was a family, a meager family. They struggled to make ends meet. And because the father of the family had fallen into debt, he decided that maybe it was time to cut some trees. If he cleared a portion of the land that he had inherited from his great-grandfather, that maybe they could sell the timber and they could pay off the debt. And so the father said to his oldest son, "It is time for you to go and cut some trees." And the oldest son took half a loaf of bread and a lump of cheese and an axe upon his shoulder, and he marched across the far meadow to the very edge of the ancient forest. No sooner had he stepped into the cool shade and felt the breeze, he raised the axe over his head and thwack, thwack, thwack. And just as he began to chop this ancient tree, out came a troll. "Who are you cutting my trees? I shall gobble you up." Ah! And off ran the oldest boy. What is it about these trolls always wanting to gobble you up? Well, when the oldest son returned without the axe and said, there's a terrible troll. I cannot cut the trees. He claims the trees are his. The next day, the second son was sent with half a loaf of bread and a lump of hard cheese and the father's other older axe over his shoulder. He marched across the far meadow, and when he arrived in the forest, amongst the ancient trees, the cacophony of insects singing, the cool breeze, he raised the axe over his head and thwack, thwack, out came the troll. I'm going to gobble you up if you cut another of my trees. The boy ran off, and when he returned home without the axe, they both chided the youngest brother, whose name, by the way, was Ashlad. Have you heard of Ashlad? Maybe I'll tell you more about him later. But Ashlad, they said, you cannot go. You are not brave enough. That troll, he will gobble you up. But Ashlad said, it is my turn. I'll go. Now, some thought that Ashlad was a bit of a fool. But he did keep what little wits he had about him. And when his mother said, I have no more bread, I have no more cheese, he said, I think I saw some spoiled milk. I'll pour it in some cheesecloth and I'll make curd. And that will be enough. And his father said, but what about an axe? I have no more. He said, I think my brothers left the axes where I need them, and I will find them. And he crossed the far meadow. When he arrived in the ancient grove, yes, there were both axes. He set one aside. He picked up the sharpest, newer one, and thwack, out came the troll. No, you shall not gobble me up, said Ashlad. If you try, I will squeeze your heart like this stone. And he pulled out the curd. I will squeeze your heart until blood drips from it like blood dripping from this white stone. You must know, trolls are quite simple and easy to fool. And when the troll saw the white blood coming from the white stone, he said, do not squeeze my heart. Do not harm me. Maybe you can help me, said Ashlad. I have 2 axes. And the troll said, maybe we can have a contest. We can see who can chop down the most trees. And so Ashlad picked up his axe. The troll picked up the other. Thwack, 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 thwack. As fast as the troll went, Ashlad kept pace. But Ashlad made sure that he timed his thwack, so he always got in the last thwack. Timber! So it appeared that every tree they felled was felled by Ashlad. And before the afternoon had passed, they had cleared just enough timber. The boy estimated the board feet, that if they lopped off the branches and they stacked the logs, he could more than pay for his father's debt, and the rest of the forest would still stand. The troll said, it's getting late. Too late for you to find your way home. It'll be dark soon. Why don't you spend the night in my lair? You can rest there, and we can cut more trees tomorrow. Ashlad saw the wisdom in such a decision. It was getting dark, and so he followed the troll up into the crevasse of the mountain where 2 steep peaks came together. There was a deep cave. The troll, he picked up 2 huge iron kettles. He handed them to Ashlad. He said, take them to the spring down the hill and fill them both. We shall eat porridge for supper. But Ashlad took one look at those iron kettles. He could not lift one, let alone carry 2, especially if they were filled with water. And so thinking quickly, he said, that's too much work for me. It would be much easier for me to move the spring. I'll just turn the spring so it runs uphill and it fills both kettles for us. Did I tell you trolls are simple? The troll said, "No, do not destroy my spring. It is my only source of clean and pure water. I will carry the kettles and you can start the fire," which was exactly what Aslak was hoping. Because Aslak could only imagine. It takes one kettle to make porridge. What might be cooked in the other? Aslak stirred up a fire as the troll returned with both kettles full. He put both kettles on the fire, and as soon as one began to bubble and boil, they poured in the oats to make the porridge. But while the troll was gone, Aslak had taken a leather satchel that he had carried the curd in, and he slipped it down inside his shirt. Because the troll said, "Let's have an eating contest." And Aslak said, "Yes, I'm sure I can eat more porridge than you can." And so they began to ladle porridge. But Aslak put most of it into the leather satchel. So it appeared that his belly was growing quite large. And just as his belly was about to burst, Aslak said, "I am sure I can defeat you." And he pulled out a dagger, a long sharp blade, and he sliced open his belly. And the porridge came out of the leather satchel. "I bet you can't do that." And he tossed the knife to the troll, who wanted to win the contest at all cost. And he sliced open his belly. His entrails poured out along with his blood. And he fell to the ground dead. And Aslak, he searched in the camp of the troll, and he found great stacks of gold and silver, more than he could carry, but he carried what he could. And he returned home a very wealthy man. He paid off his father's debt. He added sheep and cattle and chickens to the pasture. He bought more forest, which they selectively cut. And the family, they all lived happily ever after. So both of those stories you might see as a simple fairy tale you might tell to your children. And I hope you take these stories home. Tell them to your children and your grandchildren. But you, being wiser than most children, or at least wiser than some, you see the forestry and turf management built into these stories. Things that I studied at the university. The people who had lived on that land for 1,000 years already knew the benefits of moving your goats so you do not overgraze, of harvesting the timber respectful of the forest itself. These are the kinds of things we can learn from these ancient stories. But the word Aslak, how many of you have heard of Aslak? I'm sure you have, but maybe in French or German. In German, it's Aschenputtel. In French, it's Cinderella. How many of you have heard of Cinderella? You know what a cinder is. You know what ashes are. We all have a time of ashes. We all have a time, what we now call adolescence, when we are not sure of ourselves and our place in the world. And sometimes we must go into the dark forest. We must face trial and tribulation and overcome the trolls who are everywhere. In that time of ashes, whether it's Cinderella. But the thing about Cinderella is she is still waiting for her damsel in distress. No, she's the damsel. She's waiting for her knight in shining armor to rescue her. But in Scandinavia, we admire strong women. Do you know one? I married one. Do you know my most favorite story? And maybe one of the most famous. It has been made into film and republished in dozens of books. In the end, it was the title of our collection, East of the Sun, West of the Moon. In the far northern country, there was a family with many children and a father and mother who had trouble putting food on the table. They lived quite poorly until one day they heard a strange knock upon the door. Who could it be at this late hour? When the father opened the door, he saw there a great white bear. He said, "I have watched your family and I know you are hungry. If you will give your oldest daughter's hand in marriage, then I will make you as wealthy as you are poor." The father said, "I cannot give my daughter's hand in marriage without her permission. Come back in a week and we shall give you an answer." And I will shorten this story greatly in just a moment. And so he asked, and his daughter said, "I do not know the man. How can I marry a great white bear?" But the family pleaded, "We shall be as rich as we are poor." And for her family, she decided she could make this sacrifice. And maybe it would be a great adventure. They traveled off to a castle, and they lived quite well, except he was a white bear during the day. And only when she was asleep did he crawl into her bed when all was dark, and he was a man. And she could feel his warmth. And they would lay in the darkness and they would talk. And she heard his kindness. And she fell in love. But during the day, she was alone in the castle for the most part. And so she said, "I wish to go and visit my family." And the white bear said, "You can, but you must never be alone with your mother. She will try to lead you astray and have a conversation, and it will not be good for either of us." He took her to visit her family, but now instead of a small hovel, they lived in a grand manor house. The children were dressed gaily, and they feasted, and she loved her family dearly. Her mother said several times, "What does he look like? I've never seen him in daylight. What kind of a man is he? You must come into the kitchen and help me with dishes." She helped with dishes, and her mother had her alone. "You've never seen him. Take this small candle and light it at night so you can tell me what he looks like." She did as her mother instructed, and when she returned, while he was asleep, she lit the candle, and 3 drops of wax fell onto his shirt, and he awoke with the warmth. "You broke your promise. If I could have remained here with you for a year, the spell would have been broken, and we could marry. But now I must go east of the sun and west of the moon, for a troll princess has claimed my soul, and that is why I'm a bear in the day and a man at night. And we shall be married at the end of this year. You will never see me again, for I must travel east of the sun and west of the moon." And off he went. But she did not give up so readily. She met an old woman who might know, playing with a golden apple. "I do not know, but my sister might. Take the golden apple, it might help you." She met the sister who was playing with a golden spindle. "I do not know, but my oldest sister might. Take the golden spindle, it might help you." She found the oldest sister who was playing with a golden spinning wheel. "Ah, talk to my friend, the east wind. He will carry you. And take this golden spindle." The east wind blew her to the south wind, who blew her to the west wind, who blew her to the north wind, and the north wind carried her east of the sun, west of the moon, and there was a grand palace inhabited by trolls. She sat outside playing with the golden apple. The princess of the trolls said, "What do you want for that golden apple? It is not for sale. Everyone has their price. Name it." "I understand a man is enchanted here. I wish to spend one night with him." "I can arrange this. Give me the golden apple first." She tossed the golden apple up to the window, and the front door opened. She was led to a bedchamber where her man, the prince, was asleep. She passed the night, but she could not wake him. She shook him. She cried, she moaned, she screamed, she wailed, but nothing would stir him. And the next morning she was led away from the castle. She sat outside and she played with a golden spindle. And the princess of the trolls said, "Wow, a golden spindle. I bet it has magic. Give it to me. It is not for sale at any price." A second night she could not awaken him. But the third night, the servants of the princess of the trolls were good Christian people who had been captured and enchanted. But when they heard her wailing through the night, they told the prince that a young maiden has been here 2 nights. And it dawned on the prince that every night before he went to sleep, the princess of the trolls gave him brandy, and it made him drowsy. So that night he pretended to drink the brandy, and he pretended to be asleep. And when she came, he was awake. He said, "You have come just in time, for tomorrow we shall be wed. But I have an idea that might save us. Before we are married, I will ask her to wash the shirt that you stained with those 3 drops of wax. And when she cannot, I will ask you. And if you can, the spell might be broken." Well, the next morning, as they prepared for the wedding, he said to the troll wife he was supposed to marry, "I wish to wear this beautiful white shirt, but you can see the 3 drops of wax. If you can wash it, then the wedding will continue." She tried to wash it, but the wax just smeared, and black tar seemed to sink in. The wax attracted dirt. She gave it to other trolls, and soon the shirt was as black as ashes. He held it up and said, "You cannot do this simple thing. I bet that peasant woman sitting by the outside of the castle, I bet even she could wash it. And if she can, I will marry her." And he tosses the shirt, and she boils water. And the warm water melts the wax. And when she dunks it in the hot soapy water, it comes out white as snow. The princess of the trolls is so angry, her head explodes. She explodes. A dozen trolls explode, and the enchantment is broken. And all the good Christian people who were enslaved were now free. And the north wind carried them one by one back to their homes. And the prince had found his princess. She rescued him. And the two, they wed. And they both lived. Thank you for listening. There are 178 stories I could tell you if we had more time. Thank you for listening. Thank you.